Our next panel of the day will be focused on how to provide immersive learning experiences, both remotely and physically. This will be moderated by Hugh Martin, Registrar and Chief Administrative Officer from the British University in Dubai. He will lead us in the discussion today and introduce you to our amazing speakers. Over to you, Hugh.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. You're very welcome, everyone, wherever you're joining us. Good morning to those of you in the USA. Good afternoon to those of you in the Gulf, and good evening to those of you in Australia. We have an amazingly diverse and experienced panel to share with you this afternoon. I'm very pleased to introduce, and we'll have a discussion that touches on some things which are very pertinent to us right now as we deal with COVID-19 in the education sector. And I'm pleased to say that on my panel this afternoon, we have all three sections, primary, secondary, and tertiary education represented. So let me just introduce you to our speakers, starting with Dr. Barbara Kersham, board member of American Public Education and senior fellow and innovation advisor at the University of Pennsylvania's Graduate School of Education in the USA. Next, Grant Jones, ICT and Innovations Leader at Jordan Springs Public School, as well as being a lecturer in Primary Human Society and its Environment and Primary Maths at Western Sydney, University, Australia. Then to Dr. Joseph Kotowski. Joseph is a little bit closer to home. He's the Principal and Chief Executive Officer at West Yas Academy here in the UAE. Then Ghada Fahmy, Learning Technologies Coach at Caulfield Grammar School in Australia. And last but not least, Dr. Zara Al-Rawahi, Director of Building Innovative Capabilities at the Research Council of the Sultanate of Oman. You're all very welcome. Now, I'm going to ask our panelists to give a very short, because we're tight on time this afternoon, a very short couple of minutes of their personal approach to providing immersive learning experiences remotely and physically, which is the theme of our discussion. And once we've done that, I'll open up with some sub-themes to explore amongst ourselves. So perhaps, Bobby, if you would kick us off.
Thank you, and good morning to all of you all over the world, or good afternoon or good evening, whatever the case may be. It's very nice to be here and to serve on such an exciting panel. I've been looking at AI in higher education and AI in learning for a long time. It actually was reflected some of the work I did very early on in my research. And right now I've been looking at 4 areas of AI and how it impacts higher education. The most important one today, of course, is mentoring and tutoring and student engagement. And there are lots of new companies being started all over the world to address this use of AI in engaging students. The second area, which is going to become a major area globally, is admissions. How we no longer have the same testing programs available. We are seeing a major change in how we evaluate students for admissions, and AI is going to play a very large role in that across K through 12 as well as in higher ed. And then the third area is how do we create personalized learning using AI and understanding that immersion and making the experience as personal as possible. And I'm sure we're all seeing companies that are trying to address that issue. I think my initial reaction to AI has been very positive. However, I still think we're in the very early stages of looking at applying AI in learning. And I find as an advisor to hundreds of entrepreneurs globally that the problem here is that we have a phenomenal solution and it gets better every day with the use of AI. However, I don't think we've defined the problems very well yet. So we've got a lot of great solutions that we're trying to find a problem for. So I think we have to be very cognizant of looking at AI and saying it's going to solve our problem. I think we have to identify what the problem is and be sure that we're looking at it from how AI can improve it. So that addresses my sort of last area. I think the most exciting area to me in AI right now is what we're doing today, the use of global connections and the immersion and experiences all over the world, because we can't get on an airplane today and fly somewhere. It's much more difficult to immerse ourselves in a physical experience as well as a intellectual experience. So those are the areas I've been interested in. That's the areas I write about in my research and Forbes.com. So I look forward to this conversation. Thank you, Hugh.
Great, thank you, Bobby. And I know we'll come back to some of those themes, but enough from me now. Let's move on to Grant.
Thanks, Hugh. I'm from Sydney, Australia, and it's nighttime here, so good afternoon, everyone, and good morning. I primarily teach primary school children, kindergarten through to year 6, and a majority of my area is really looking at using augmented reality and virtual reality to further the curriculum. Not only consuming with AR and VR, but also creating, and that's really a big push for me in the foundation school that I'm in at the moment. And throughout this pandemic, it's actually been, the immersive technology has been fantastic because our students can't go out on a field trip or an excursion. So actually having some virtual reality excursions are actually helping us to push our curriculum further, as well as just our day-to-day innovative technology, but also getting out into the world and actually getting further into what we weren't able to do previously. So that's a really big section for what I'm doing at the moment with my in my area. And also I'm a part of a research project at the moment that's actually looking at using augmented reality to push multimodal text and actually bringing literacy to life. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Grant. And now, Zahra, if you would just give us your brief overview.
Here in Oman, we totally believe that the fourth industrial revolution is going to make a significant improvement in the quality of education. And my work experience is related to medical education. In the medical education, we provided a simulated type of learning where the simulation can mimic different type of diseases, such as cardiac diseases, and the student interact as a teachers using this mannequin to, as a test tool for the student to mimic specific diseases that normally is very difficult to be, diagnosed or getting, a patient during the examination period. Moreover, currently we are more focused toward the utilization of virtual reality in medical education, and especially how the VR and the augmented reality can assist medical students really thoroughly understand especially during the early years of education, the different part of the body and the function of the physiological type. So all these are mimicked within, they are totally immersed within the VR and combining the virtual reality with augmented reality to provide like an authentic type of learning that really adapt according to the learner's actually way of conceptualizing information. So our focus mainly in the medical type of students and how to enhance the medical curriculum, the medical teaching using various type of, virtual realities, augmented realities, as well a mixed reality, such as a 3D type of elements where students can totally be engaged in this type of learning environment.
Shukran, Zahra. So finally, Joseph, if you would also give your overview, and then I'd like to pick up some of these things. We can already see some synergies between your different experiences in quite a variety of ways.
Thank you very much, Dr. Martin, and good day to you wherever you may be in the world, and thank you for having me. So in our learning community, we're using adaptive-based learning through the form of literacy and numeracy, and it's very personalized in the sense that it's able to pick up on a student's current level and reroute them to where they may be performing. I think an early panelist member brought up the power of AI, but then really not being able to nail down what the problems are and how to leverage it specifically within the context. I would say that, you know, given the rapid change of pace with the COVID pandemic, certainly it's pushed the organization to think about a lot more intentionally on how you're implementing these tools. So, you know, I think there's a very quick rush to bring in a lot of these platforms into learning communities, especially since digital learning has to take the fore given the context. I would say that, you know, it's really about identifying what is the intended impact that you want to get out of the program that you're introducing into your community, and then kind of how are you looking at that from your different stakeholders. So, you know, how are you making sure that there's a shared conceptual understanding of what the tool is intended to do? How are you making sure that, you know, the community is really has the capacity to bring that program to scale, and students understand how to use it, and there's a shared commitment of learning from not only students and teachers, but also parents that are on the other end trying to support their children at home. And then finally, I think that just gets into the competency piece of really, you know, measuring the intended impact of the tool. So I do look forward to discussing what that's looked like in my community, but that's the broader context of our experience at this moment.
Excellent. Thank you, Joseph. So I think that's a great place to as a springboard for our first discussion, is to think around the points that Joseph mentioned there about stakeholders. I know that's a business time, but we're talking in student terms, from young children in some cases all the way up to mature adults at the tertiary level. And I think student engagement, particularly the way we've had to deal with it during this latest pandemic, is something which is in the forefront of our minds. But we should, of course, and we all know on this panel, remember that this is not a new issue just brought about by COVID-19, the digitalization of learning. If I think back to when I started my academic career 15 years ago, over 15 years ago, I was lecturing at that point almost entirely online at the university. And this is, you know, using a VLE, which would be considered reasonably antiquated now. But as somebody was saying earlier on in the summit in a different session, the use of video technology, use of what we're doing right now isn't that new. But it's around, as Joseph said, the engagement with our students themselves and how we retain that. So perhaps, Bobby, if I could come back to you, because I know your work looks at mentoring, tutoring, retaining students. So perhaps if you could talk us through a little bit about your thoughts of how AI does that and how you do that.
I think we missed Gada, so we better have an introduction before I begin.
You're absolutely right. And that apology on my running list, I went straight through. And so I'm enormously sorry, Rada. Please give us your overview. And that gives, cheekily, Bobby a little bit of time to think through her answer while you do so.
That's a great strategy to buy time. Thank you so much. All right, so I would like to introduce myself. My name is Gada Fermi, and I am the Learning Technologies coach in one of the leading schools in the city of Melbourne in Australia, which is Caulfield Grammar School. My role is as a learning technology coach. I'm a member of a team of coaches, and my role is to assist my colleagues in finding the best tools, technology tools, and utilize them to enhance pedagogy in the classroom. We found ourselves this year in a very uncertain, like during this time, we found ourselves doing usual things in a very unusual way. Teachers lost that one-to-one contact with students, and that sort of it was a challenge. It was a very challenging time, but our focus in our school was to, our strategy was to, and priority was safety, and make learning simple and familiar for students. So we didn't go and purchase, some new technology tool. Rather than that, we kept things familiar for students to help them feel secure and safe, and to minimize the cognitive effort that they need to access their learning materials. So when students lost that one-to-one contact with their teachers, we found that students with additional or special needs, they had a very challenging time coping with the daily requirements and accessing their curriculum. So therefore, building up capacity within our learning community was a huge theme for us in our school, and helping students or enabling students to access these learning materials. Also, there was a lot of positive outcomes during this period of time. It wasn't just all negative. We all experienced a huge learning curve, everyone on their own pace and level. And in terms of using educational technology and also across campus collaboration and connecting with our community in a very new way. So it brought us together in a different way. I would like to acknowledge that, and this wasn't just challenges. So thank you, and I look forward to expand more on these thoughts.
Thank you. And apologies again for oversight. But actually, your comments, I think that many of us were nodding that the huge challenges that the world is facing right now, and those of us in education particularly, but we should be proud of both our colleagues and our students particularly for what many of us turned around in barely a few weeks or days back in March to move online, and that, you're right, is worth acknowledging. So, Bobby, I think you gained from my error a couple of extra minutes there.
That's okay.
Your response.
That was very helpful because it goes into some of the things that I'm going to say. And while I'm speaking about higher ed, I think it applies across all learning, what I'm going to talk about. But I think in terms of the tutoring and the mentoring and engaging of students, it's very important that we look at three things in our programs, whether it's in medical school or whether it's way down in elementary and preschool. But I think we have to address three areas. We have to address, one, what is student agency and what is project-based learning? Because for the first time, we are beginning to think about how do we engage students in a different way with peer-to-peer learning, and we need the virtual, we need the augmented reality to make those projects more hands-on and more experiential and more engaging for the students. The second area that I think we need to really seriously address, which is very difficult for us as educators, but we need to teach less. Our curricula has become so full, and we try to teach way too much. We did that even before COVID. So what we have to emphasize is on teaching those skills to be able to learn on our own, or to have the skills we need to learn the materials, because we just can't continue to have kids sit through 7 different courses and read as much material and take as many exams. The third area then leads to assessment. We have to change the way we assess learning and the mastery of learning. And these are difficult things. I would highly recommend that we all realize that we're in a wonderful situation to be able to rethink education for the first time in thousands of years. And we ought to take advantage of that, and that the new normal will have to be different than the old normal. So I think that AR and AI are going to be able to let us do some of these things, especially in assessment and especially in student agency and thinking about how we work and engagement. I highly recommend that we all begin to look at the new companies that are coming out to address some of these areas. In medical school, I highly recommend that we look at a project called Sophia, and Sophia has built a hands-on virtual reality environment for learning. It came out of Harvard Medical School. It was started by 2 doctors. It's highly exciting and can be used across K through 12. In terms of maintaining student engagement, I think, and teacher engagement, I think we need to look at companies that are engaging visually and virtually with students in their home, in their backyard, and in their labs, and look at companies that are Teach FX and Ed Connective that are doing that. So I think if we look at this from a bigger picture of what are the things we need to fundamentally change about learning, AI is going to play a big role, because then we'll be looking at the problem first and not the solution. So that's what I'm thinking about, and I'd love to hear other people's comments on that.
Excellent, Bobby. I think this issue you raised in your first introduction, actually, around having solutions that are not necessarily bolt on to problems, the idea of the students themselves and how they engage with the process. And I want to turn now to Joseph, actually, to think about that personalized learning, but particularly not just from the student's perspective. We talked about engagement there with Bobby, but also how you inculcate differentiation strategies for the teachers themselves. So Joseph, could you take us through?
Sure, thank you so much. So I think it actually is a good moment in time for this shift to happen that needs to take place. We're really, teachers are more of coaches, mentors, facilitators, and not teachers of learning. And so kind of the adaptive-based programs that we're using, the way that they work is, you start with a diagnostic test, or you're able to import some baseline data, and that will set the level of challenge for the student depending on where they are at in their skill progression. And based on that, that's really powerful for a few reasons. It enables the teacher to kind of quickly organize and group kids much more quickly than they could have, manually. And so by doing so, what happens from a differentiation perspective is that suddenly, you can have 3 or 4 learning groups within the same class, as any good teacher will know. And so if we're talking about, how to provide this immersive learning experiences remotely, a good teacher will set it up so that, she's got these different groups hitting different objectives and really serving as that mentor facilitator with small group instruction, interrupting misconceptions that certain groups might have, or even pushing some gifted and talented students that might be performing beyond the grade level expectations. It's literally become, I think, so convenient for the teacher to be able to click a button and quickly have the power at their fingertips to know what the student's learning needs are, as opposed to the traditional sense of having to figure that out in a classroom setting. So I'd say that's been a really big bonus, that's come out of this COVID experience and really pushing this new program that we're using. I'd say additionally, it's just as important to build, I mentioned earlier, capacity. And so professional development, training, best practices, really sharing that and modeling that to the community. And that includes creating support mechanisms for our parents to have access to through, parent workshops or through tutorial videos and so on. So I think that's, what my experience has been and what's come to mind.
Excellent. That's an interesting point you raise around the students being able to press a button, as you put it, and then teaching staff and colleagues not having those what we would call non-verbal cues that we get when we're in a classroom, when we're face to face. Which many of us, that's the way human beings have interacted for so many thousands of years. We're used to reading body language, picking up on things, and of course that's missing when we talk about the online environment. And I wanted to kind of pick up on some of those themes, because both Grant and Zahra mentioned both, AR and VR, and the benefits and perhaps opportunities as well as pitfalls, maybe some disadvantages around bringing them into this new online world that we're facing. So Zahra, could you just maybe talk us through some of the benefits from your perspective of VR and AR and 3D immersive learning?
Great, thank you very much. Maybe I totally agree with Professor Bobby regarding the project-based learning and the importance of project-based learning and adaptive type. And these tools really provide us with a great learning environment that provide adaptive type of learning, especially if it is embedded within AI type of environment. During the COVID-19, we managed actually to find great resources from various companies that provide authentic type of learning that really that provide learning that really interact with the STEM education. It foster intellectual curiosities, and it helps students really gain a deeper understanding of various topics, and it engages them in the learning. But the major challenge was getting the right assessment. What are the right tools to assess students? To assess their, we can utilize the AI in assessing student performance or student learning styles, whatever. But the availability of these tools within different companies, they are not mature yet enough in order to utilize these tools. Even though the technology by itself, we believe we can make it with this technology, but we couldn't find best SMEs who provide educational systems with best tools to assess student performance, student abilities, and all the tools are, they are assessing factual type of information, not, the ability of to do a problem solving, to master certain skills. So how to get those tools, how to adapt the technology toward teaching the basic skills. We know that the technology, they can do that, especially the virtual reality environment, when it is utilized with the augmented reality and if it is enhanced with the artificial intelligence algorithm, they can do that. But the solutions are not available yet, according to our knowledge. We did a lot of search. We tried to find even researchers to find ways of best way to assess clinical skills of a student, but we couldn't get much a mature system in these areas. So, if the panelists, anyone on the panelists can assist us in, finding best tools that would really assess like the skills of the 21st century, the clinical skill of medical students, the problem-solving skills of whatever, this type of tool that we really needed to focus the e-learning now, instead of focusing on just gaining an understanding of the phenomena. We want to move further toward, assessing the skills. And the assessment of the skills, we have relatively challenges on it, actually.
Thank you, Zahra. And actually, you raise an important point. It goes back to something Bobby mentioned about having, too much in our curricula, having it too full. And also, I think, and I'm sure my teaching colleagues have better experience in this than me, having an assessment system which is based on, it's results oriented. People are too obsessed. Our ministries, our companies are too obsessed with the summative often and not the formative. And that's a major problem that we need to think around when we think about how we might change education the way that Bobby started, by revolutionizing the way we assess our students. Grant, if I could come to you now, because Zahra brought up one potential barrier. What were the barriers that you experienced? Because you talked about using AR and VR both remotely and physically.
I think probably for schools within Australia and the schools that I've been working with is the apps for AR, they sort of fall in and out of the Apple App Store. So once you find a really good app, once you download, that's fine. But then I've been to conferences over here in Australia and they'll be talking about this great AR app that I've used and then it's no longer available. And I think that's part of the pitfall, that what happens is they fall in and out, or you've got schools that have invested thousands upon thousands of dollars in iPads, but they're 3 models previous to when the app gets released, and then they can't actually use the app. And I think that's a huge pitfall that I'm finding with a lot of schools. Teacher capacity, I think, is another one, and actually understanding the benefits of AR and VR in the classroom, but not doing it as an add-on, actually as a replacement. And I think that's a really big thing, especially when I speak to a lot of teachers. They say, oh, here's another thing that we have to add into the curriculum. Well, no, you don't. This is going to be a tool to help push the curriculum in a completely different way, and then they can actually move forward with their curriculum. AR and VR sit perfectly in a lot of our syllabus documents, because a lot of our syllabus documents actually lend itself to inquiry learning and your project-based learning. So if you give the students an AR experience with an inquiry question before they embark on the experience, then you've actually got meaning behind that. I know Zahra talked about authentic integration of AR and VR. It's not just something fun for the kids to do. There's actually learning and meaning behind it. And what I find, AR is still emerging especially for primary school over in Australia, it's still an emerging technology where there are some really great apps, but then some not so great apps that AR. And a lot of them, unfortunately, with budgets with schools, they tend to go for the free ones, but then you've got the ads that pop up and all sorts. So that's another barrier where the ads are popping up and they get a certain amount through the experience, and then an ad pops up, and then you've got to wait the 30 seconds before they can hit the X before they can move on. And sometimes those ads could be a war game or something inappropriate for the kids to see. So I've actually moved and sort of with my teaching staff that I work with is moving into creating AR experiences through websites such as Metaverse, with actually the teachers are creating the experience for the students. And what we're doing at the moment, because we can't have any parents on, we've got kinder orientation happening next term, and unfortunately we can't get the kindies on, because normally over here in Australia we get the kindies in the last term before they go to school the following year and do lots of activities. Unfortunately, that's not possible because of COVID. So we're actually creating an augmented reality experience for our students, which have portals where they can walk into a kindergarten classroom and look around and see what it's like. There's also going to be videos and all sorts popping up for them to experience in a virtual and an augmented way what it would be like to be in kindergarten. So yeah, that's probably the biggest thing. I think teacher capacity is a big one. And actually teacher buy-in, probably before the capacity building, it's the teacher buy-in, actually getting teachers on board to see the importance of this technology in the classroom.
Thanks, Grant. Now, you mentioned quite eloquently there the issues around, incompatibility of older apps or older equipment. And I want to come to Radha now, because she said something at the beginning which really sparked a chord in me around, especially at universities where back in March, April, we were bombarded by ed tech vendors trying to sell us all kinds of things. And, we need to bear in mind, all of us from Australia, USA, here in the Gulf, Middle East, we live in extremely lucky environments. For a large proportion of the world, compatibility of apps are irrelevant. There's no Wi-Fi, there's no connectivity, there's limited AR and VR because they don't have the ability to teach at a distance online. So, this point that Radha mentioned, I'd like to come to you now, Radha, to think about this making of learning immersive from a distance, both physically and remotely, but maintaining that kind of face-to-face or somehow that presence, the blended approach, if you will.
Very important question. Very important because as universities in the US, and speaking to a friend in Dubai last week, he was saying all your programs are beginning to open up, your schools are open, and your universities. In the US, we have universities trying blended, we have universities trying all online, and we have universities that are come back fully. So I think we're still experimenting. We're trying to understand what works, and we have to understand what will continue to work. I serve on the board of American Public Education, which is a fully online university. We've been fully online even before COVID. We have 85,000 students online. So I think schools are going to be exploring what works for their population, which works for the region that they live in, and what works as we try to solve the COVID problem with vaccine or treatments or better ways to mitigate the issues. But I do think that we're going to learn a lot. And for example, in teacher education, most of these teachers, and you all can relate to this, whether higher ed or K through 12, and as we say in the US, they, in the university, 70% of the faculty had never been online or taught a course online in the United States. And of that 70%, 90% of them didn't even know what Zoom was, or WebEx, or Blue Jeans. So we were talking about a major pedagogical issue. And in K through 12, the problems were even more intense, not only because we didn't have access, they hadn't done it, they didn't have access, as Zara has pointed out. So we are looking at a major remake, and we need to do research about the pedagogy and the ways people learn. And we need to teach our educators what online learning is about, what blended learning is about, and what fully, mixed learning is about. And we don't have anybody really doing a lot of research on that. We have very few researchers, and we probably need to, as a group, put together those people that are doing research and share that research as we relook at the pedagogy and design. So in answer to your question, I think we do have to address the fact that there isn't access, that some schools will be blended and some schools fully online, but we need to know the research on which we're doing this. We just can't randomly decide that we're going to keep everybody online and we're going to send them all back to school. We know the terrible impact it will have on young people. We know the terrible impact it's going to have on rural people, students in rural areas or without access. So I think research is an essential part of what we're going to do going forward. And it needs to be case-based research as well as fundamental primary research. We have lots of cases out there, and because we're all so busy just making do and putting out the fire in front of us, we're not documenting these cases as well as we should be, and I think that's probably something that we should be doing sooner than later. So my real guidance here is that we're going to be doing all three in the future, not one or the other, and we need to know the best research to make that decision for our audience that we're teaching at the time.
Thanks, Bobby. Now, Hada, I want to come to you now because you've got that experience of blended learning, and you spoke eloquently of trying to keep your students, particularly in your environment, closer to you and not so wrapped up in the tech, perhaps. So can you talk us through what you did?
In our school, we had a look at the learning experience that we would like our students to have. So, by the way, we're still in lockdown in Melbourne since March, so we haven't got out of it yet. And today is the first day of term 4 for our students, and so we're still in this environment. We didn't get out of it yet. We instead of replacing or using technology to mimic what happens in the classroom in terms of like opening up the computer or the laptop or whatever device and then sit in front of it and then have a lesson after the other, we actually provided students the opportunity to have synchronous and asynchronous times with their teachers. And that is exactly to address the issue of equity for our students. Not all students have the same internet plan in our community. Some of them live in rural areas and they used to come to school and join like in the boarding house. They're boarding students. So now they got back to their rural areas. Or and in a household they will have like siblings who will want to access their learning materials as well using the same device. So all of these were present in our mind when we were entering the lockdown time or thinking about how we are going to continue learning when we are on remote mode. So we started with asynchronous and then gradually started to build up some synchronous time with our students. The other thing that came out from our staff, which was fantastic to hear, is that all the feedback that we got from our staff and actually they wanted to continue using blended learning tools where wherever we are, whether we are in school, away from school, remote, on campus, synchronous or asynchronous learning experience, the students will continue their learning no matter what happens. And using these blended learning tools to have to help teachers differentiate learning for the students. So that was a request that actually came from our staff saying that this is fantastic, we would like to continue that. And also it made us think about assessment and what is the purpose of assessment, why we're doing a test, for example, what are we trying to find out and to understand what we would like our students to learn. So all of these thoughts and questions came to our table of discussion when we were making decisions around remote learning. looking at the blended learning tools available in our school, as I said before, we kept it simple, safe first, simple and familiar for our students. And we had a look, we are an Office 365 school, and we use all Apple devices across our primary and secondary campuses. So we had a look at our available learning technology tools where we can create immersive by design learning materials for our students. So whether the students are on a synchronous or asynchronous learning mode, they can experience a well-differentiated lesson with their needs catered for. For example, utilizing immersive reader function on Office 365 tools like Class Notebook, where students can click on that particular feature and have the computer read out the text, the content for them. Using Microsoft Word, and also using the collaboration space there on Class Notebook, using voice note, the ability to insert a voice note file on a Class Notebook, which helped teachers a lot, where we missed that, interaction with the teachers. There's a lot that a voice can carry, a message can carry. Instead of just typing, well done, good job, students were able to hear the voice of their teacher, and they missed them a lot. And that was very helpful. We also, for example, using Microsoft Word dictation function to help students when with additional needs or extra needs, students who are learning English as a second language, and they have, for example, typing fatigue because they've been typing all day. So they use these features to help them continue their learning. Another great example was building, for example, PowerPoint, which is a tool that most of the teachers use across all around the world. So looking at ways where we can build slideshows with thinking, like while you are designing your lesson, thinking about the needs of all your learnings, like by utilizing some of these features, like including alt text when you are putting photos on the slideshow, choosing fonts and styles and colors that are accessible to all your students. Are you thinking about students with dyslexia in your classroom when you are making your PowerPoint? What type of fonts and colors that will be suitable for these students too?
To cut you off, Heather, because we could do this all afternoon. I wish we had many more hours, but we've over our time anyway. It's been fantastic listening to all of you. I really learned a lot this afternoon. It only goes for me to thank our hosts, the Saudi Arabian Ministry of Education, the G20 Saudi Arabia, Shukran Jazilan to them, to all of you, to Joseph, to Bobby, to Zahra, to Hada, and to Grant. Thank you so much for your time. For those who are listening in and watching us, and I hope you've enjoyed this afternoon, please do join us in the booths in the networking area where you'll be able to ask some questions. We haven't been able to take your questions this afternoon because we've had a packed schedule, but wherever you are, take care, look after each other, and keep your ideas flowing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.